Chapter 14 The Tarn Death. Shackled in a kneeling position, my back open and bleeding from the lash, I was thrown before the Ubar. 9 days I had been a prisoner in his camp, subjected to torture and abuse, yet this was the first time since I had saved his life that I had seen him. I gathered that he had seen fit to terminate the suffering of the warrior who had stolen the homestone of his city. One of the Tarnsmen of Marlenus thrust his hand in my hair and forced my lips down to his saddle. I forced my head up and kept my back straight, my eyes granting my captor no satisfaction. I knelt upon the granite floor of a shallow cave in one of the volti peaks, a sheltered fire on each side of me. Before me, on a rough throne of piled rocks, sat Marlenus, his long hair over his shoulders, his great beard reaching almost to his sword belt. He was a gigantic man, larger even than the older Tarl, and in his eyes, wild and green, I saw the masterful flame which had in its way also burned in the eyes of Talina, his daughter. Die though I must at the hands of this magnificent barbarian, I could feel no ill will toward him. If I had to kill him, I would have done so, not with hatred or rancor, but rather with respect. Around his neck he wore the golden chain of the Ubar, carrying the medallion-like replica of the homestone of Ar. In his hands he held the stone itself, that humble source of so much strife, bloodshed, and honor. He held it gently, as though it might have been a child. At the entrance of the cave, 2 of his men had set a Thalarian lance, of the sort carried by Kazarak and his men, in a crevice obviously prepared to receive them. I suppose it was to serve for my impalement. There are various ways in which this cruel mode of execution can be accomplished, and needless to say, some are more merciful than others. I did not expect that I would be granted a swift death. "You are he who stole the homestone of Ar," said Marlenus. "Yes," I said. "It was well done," said Marlenus, looking upon the stone, holding it so the light reflected variously from its worn surface. I waited, kneeling at his feet, puzzled like he, like the others in his camp, evinced no interest in the fate of his father. "You realize clearly that you must die," said Marlenus, not looking at me. "Yes," I said. Holding the homestone in both hands, Marlenus leaned forward. "You are a young and brave and foolish warrior," he said. He looked into my eyes for a long time, then leaned back against his rough throne. "I was once as young and brave as you," he said. "Perhaps as foolish. Yes, perhaps as foolish." The eyes of Marlenus stared over my head, into the darkness outside. "I risked my life 1,000 times, and gave the years of my youth to the vision of Ar and its empire, that there might be on all Gor but one language, but one commerce, and but one set of codes, that the highways and passes might be safe, that the peasants might cultivate their fields in peace, that there might be but one council to decide matters of policy, and that there might be but one supreme city to unite the cylinders of 100 severed hostile cities. And all this you have destroyed." Marlenus looked down upon me. "What can you, a simple Tarnsman, know of these things?" "But I, Marlenus, though a warrior, was more than a warrior, always more than a warrior. Where others could see no more than the codes of their caste, where others could sense no call of duty beyond that of their homestone, I dared to the dream of Ar, that there might be an end to meaningless warfare, bloodshed, terror, an end to the anxiety and peril, the retribution and cruelty that clouds our lives. I dreamed that there might arise from the ashes of the conquest of Ar a new world, a world of honor and law, of power and of justice. Your justice, I said. Mine, if you like, he agreed. Malinus set the homestone upon the ground before him. He drew his sword, which he laid upon his knees. He looked like some remote and terrible god of war. Do you know, Tarnsman, he asked, that there is no justice without the sword? He smiled down upon me grimly. This is a terrible truth, and so consider it carefully. He paused. Without this, he said, touching the blade, there is nothing, no justice, no civilization, no society, no community, no peace. Without the sword, there is nothing. By what right, I challenged, is it the sword of Malinus that must bring justice to Gor? You do not understand, said Malinus. Right itself, the right of which you so speak reverently, owes its very existence to this sword. I think that is false, I said. I hope it is false. I shifted, even that small movement irritating those whip cuts upon my back. Malinus was patient. Before the sword, he said, there is no right, no wrong, only fact. A world of what is and what is not, rather than a world of what should be and what should not be. There is no justice until the sword creates it, establishes it, guarantees it, gives it substance and significance. He lifted the weapon, wielding the heavy metal blade as though it were a straw. First the sword, he said, then government, then law, then justice. But, I asked, what of the dream of awe, the dream of which you spake, that dream that you believe it right to bring about? Yes, said Malinus. Is that a right dream? I asked. It is a right dream, he said. And yet, your sword has not yet found the strength to bring it into being. Malinus looked at me thoughtfully, then laughed, slapping his knee. By the priest-kings, he said, I think I have lost this exchange. I shrugged somewhat incourageously in the chains. It hurt. But, went on Malinus, if what you say is true, how shall we separate the right dreams from the wrong dreams? It seemed to me a difficult question. I will tell you, laughed Malinus, and slapping his blade fondly, with this. The Ubar then rose and sheathed his sword. As if this were a signal, some of his Tarnsmen entered the cave and seized me. Impale him, said Malinus. The Tarnsmen began to unlock the shackles that I might be impaled freely upon the lance, perhaps so that my struggles might prove a more interesting spectacle to the onlookers. But I felt numb. Even my back, which presumably would have been a riot of pain if I had not felt myself near death. Your daughter, Talina, is alive, I said to Malinus. He had not asked, and I did not know, or appear to have much interest in the matter. Still, if he was human at all, I assumed this remote, kingly, dream-obsessed man would want to know. She would have brought 1,000 Tarns, said Malinus. Proceed with your payment. The Tarnsman grasped my arms more secretly. 2 others removed the Thalian lance from its crevice and brought it forward. It would be forced into my body. I would then be lifted with it into place. She is your daughter, I said to Malinus. She is alive. Did she submit to you? Asked Malinus. Yes, I said. Then she valued her life more than my honor. Suddenly my feeling of numbness, of incapacity, departed as if in a lightning flash of fury. Damn your honor, I shouted. Damn your precious stinking honor. Without realizing what I was doing, I had shaken the two restraining Tarnsmen from my arms as if they had been mere children. I rushed upon Marlenus and struck him violently in the face with my fist, causing him to reel backward, his face contorted with astonishment and then pain. I turned just in time to knock the impaling lance aside as, carried by two men, it plunged toward my back. I seized it, twisting it, and using it like a bar held by the men, leaped into the air, kicking upon them. I heard the two screams of pain, and I found that I now held the lance. Some 5 or 6 Tarnsmen ran toward the wide opening of the shallow cave, but I rushed forward, holding the lance parallel to my body, striking them with an almost superhuman strength, and forcing them over the ledge near the mouth of the cave. Their screams mingled with the shouts of rage as the other Tarnsmen rushed forward to capture me. One Tarnsman leveled a crossbow, and in that instant I hurled the lance, and he toppled backward, the shaft of that weapon protruding from his chest. The bolt from his crossbow ricocheted from the rock above my head with a flashing of sparks. One of the men I had kicked lay withering upon my feet. I then seized the sword from his scabbard, engaged and dropped the first of the Tarnsmen to reach me, and wounded the second, but was pressed back toward the rear of the cave. I was doomed, but I was resolved to die well. As I fought, I could hear the lion laughter of Marlenus behind me, as what had been a simple impalement had turned into the fight of the sort after his own heart. As I found a moment's respite, I spun to face him, hoping to have it out with the Ubar himself. But as I did so, the shackles that I had worn struck me forcibly in the face and throat, thrown like a bolo by Marlenus. I choked and shook my head to clear the blood from my eyes, and in that instant was seized by 3 or 4 of the Ubar's townsmen. "Well done, young warrior," acclaimed Marlenus. "I thought I would see if you would die like a slave." He addressed his men, pointing to you. "What say you?" he laughed. "Was this warrior not earned his right to the Tarn Death?" "He has indeed," said one of the townsmen, who held a wadded lump of tunic over his slashed rib cage. I was dragged outside. Binding fibers were fastened to my wrists and ankles. The loose ends of the fiber were then attached by broad leather straps to 2 Tarns, one of them my own sable giant. "You will be torn to pieces," said Marlenus. "Not pleasant, but better than impalement." I was fashioned securely. A Tarnsman mounted one Tarn, and another mounted the other Tarn. "I am not dead yet," I said. It was a stupid thing to say, but I felt that it was not yet my time to die. Marlenus did not deride me. "You it was who stole the homestone of Ar," he said. "You have luck." "No man can escape the Tarn Death," said one of the men. The warriors of the Ubar moved back to give the Tarns more room. Marlenus himself knelt in the darkness to check the knots upon the binding fiber, tightening them carefully as he checked the knots upon my wrists. He spoke to me. "Do you wish me to kill you now?" he asked most softly. "The Tarn Death is an ugly, ugly death." His hand, shielded from his men by his body, was upon my throat. I felt it could have crushed it easily. "Why this kindness?" I asked. "For the sake of a girl," he said. "But why?" I asked. "For the love she has for you," he said. "Your daughter hates me," I said. "She has agreed to be the mate of Gor the assassin, in order that you might have a small chance of life upon the frame of humiliation." "How do you know this?" I asked. "It is common knowledge in the camp of Gor. replied Marlenus. I could sense him smiling in that darkness. I myself, as one of the afflicted, learned it from Mintar of the merchant caste. Merchants must keep their friends on both sides of the fence, for who knows if Marlenus may not once more sit upon the throne of awe. I must have uttered a sound of joy, for Marlenus quickly placed his hand over my mouth. He asked no more if he should kill me, but he rose to his feet and walked away under the snapping wing of one of the Tarns, waving farewell. "Goodbye, warrior," he called. With a sickening lurch and a sharp jolt of pain, those two Tarnsmen brought their birds into the air. For a moment I swung between the birds, and then perhaps 100 feet into the air, the Tarnsmen at prearranged signal, a sharp blast of a Tarn whistle from the ground, turned their birds in opposite directions. The sudden retching pain seemed to rip upon my body. I believe I screamed. The birds were pulling against one another, stabilizing in their flight, each trying to pull away and gain distance from the other. Now and again there would be a moment's giddy respite from the pain, as one or the other of the birds failed to keep the ropes taut. I could hear the curse of the Tarnsman above me, and saw once or twice the flash of the striking tone guard. Then the birds would throw their weight against the ropes, bringing another flash, another wrenching of agony. Then, suddenly, there was a sound of ripping. One of the wrist ropes broke. Without thinking, but responding blindly and with a surge of joy, I seized the other wrist rope and tried to force it over my wrist. When the bird did draw again, there was a sharp pain as flesh was torn from my hand, but that rope darted off into the darkness, and I was swinging by my ankles from the other ropes. It might take a moment for the Tarnsmen to realize what had happened. Their first guess would be that my body had finally given, ripping into two, and the darkness would conceal that truth for a moment, until the Tarnsman himself would tie the ropes to test the weight of their burden. I swung myself up and began to climb one of the two ropes leading to that great bird above me. In a few wild moments I gained the saddle straps of the bird, and hauled myself nearly to the weapon rings. Then the Tarnsman saw me. He shouted in a rage. Drawing his sword, he slashed downward. I slipped down one talon of the bird, which screamed and became unmanageable. Then, with a hand, while clinging to the talon, I loosened the girth straps. In a moment, given the wild motions of the birds, the entire saddle, to which the Tarnsman was fixed by his saddle straps, slid from the bird's back and flew wildly into the depths below. I heard the shrill scream of the Tarnsman, and then the sudden silence. That other Tarnsman would be alert now. Each moment was precious. Daring at everything, I leapt upon the darkness for the reins of the bird, and with one scrambling hand managed to seize that guarding collar. The sudden tug downward caused the bird to respond as I hoped it would, as if pressure had been exerted upon the fourth strap. It immediately descended, and a minute later I was upon the ground, on a sort of rough plateau. There was a rim of red light over the mountains. I knew it was nearly dawn. My ankles were still fastened to the bird, and quickly and unsteadily I untied the ropes. In the first streak of the early light, I saw a few 100 yards away what I had hoped to find, the saddle and twisted body of the Tarnsman. I released the bird, ran to the saddle, and removed the crossbow, which to my joy was still intact. None of the bolts had escaped from their quiver. I set the bow and I fitted one of them on the guide. I could hear the flight of another Tarn above me as it swept in for its kill. Its Tarnsman, too late, saw me level the bow. The missile left him sagging lifeless upon his saddle. The Tarn, my own sable giant from Korrivar, landed and stalked majestically forward. I waited uneasily until he thrust his head past me, over my shoulder, extending his neck for preening. Good naturally, I scratched out a handful or two of lice, which I slopped upon his tongue like candy, and slapped his leg with affection. Climbing to a saddle, I dropped that dead Tarnsman to the ground, and fastened myself in the saddle straps. I felt ebullient. I had weapons again. I had my Tarn. There was even a Tarn goad in saddle gear. I rose into flight, not thinking about Korrivar again, or even that homestone. Foolishly, perhaps, but with invincible optimism, I lifted that Tarn above the Volta, and I turned it